The Honourable Member Andrew Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't listening to the previous speaker because I wanted to keep focused on the subject at hand and make a valuable contribution to this debate, rather than the usual toxic roundup that we receive from the other side of the House. So, in that respect, Mr. Speaker, we are here to talk about the New Zealand Superannuation and Retirement Income Amendment Bill, which allows guardians of New Zealand Superannuation as manager and administrator of the fund to control entities formed for the purpose of holding, facilitating or managing the investments of the fund. And, Mr. Speaker, the National Government was wrong to stop government contributions to the New Zealand Super Fund in 2009. In 2009, the National Government suspended government payments into the fund. The New Zealand Treasury projects that contributions will not resume until 2016-17. As at the 30th of June 2013, capital contributions not made by the government totalled $8.6 billion. So in the period that this government's been in office since 2008, and then they made the decision in 2009, they have reduced the contributions to every man, woman and child's future superannuation by $8.6 billion in that short space of time. That is appalling, Mr. Speaker, because during the same period of time, at the 12 months ended 30th of June 2013, for that 12-month period, the fund posted a 25.8% return. A 25.8% return. And we have the cheek of the Minister of Finance, Bill English, to sit over there and say he determined it wasn't good to be borrowing money, $100 million a week, and putting money into the future of every New Zealander's superannuation because, and the government can borrow at about 4%, even less than 4%, but the Minister of Finance, in his wisdom, even in foresight, hindsight or rare sight or any other sight, determined that it wasn't good mathematics to invest in a fund which last year returned 25.8% return. Go onto their website, Mr. Hayes, and you'll see on the website it says 25.8%. The rate of return, again on the super fund, the rate of return since its inception back in 2002 has been an average of 9.35% per annum, against a risk-free rate of return, had they just simply put the money in the bank, of 4.79%. So it's double what a risk-free return would have been for the whole period. Mr. Speaker, on the 12th of March 2014, just last week, the New Zealand Super Fund invested an additional $50 million in Bloom Energy. Bloom Energy in the United States, which is a maker of on-site power generation. This followed an initial US $50 million investment in May 2013. So the New Zealand Super Fund in the last year has invested $100 million in a US energy company. They have stated, the New Zealand Super Fund, this investment would help the fund take advantage of increasing demand for energy globally to go alongside their traditional energy investments. Now, isn't that interesting, Mr. Speaker, that here the New Zealand Fund, which now has $25 billion in assets, including $3.7 billion invested in New Zealand, is investing large sums of money in overseas energy assets. Isn't that interesting? Well, it is very interesting, because Mr. Hayes says it's not interesting, because New Zealand First has said that we will buy back the power companies and the utilities that were owned, up until this last year, they were owned 100% by all New Zealanders. They were owned by all New Zealanders, and we have said we will buy them back. Well, Mr. Speaker, a jolly good investment for the New Zealand Super Fund would be to invest back into our utilities and our power companies, take them back not under government control, because politicians like Mr Hayes and Mr English and others can then flick them on, so their mates, they're 2.5% of New Zealanders, their mates can benefit from owning the shares. Put them into ownership under the New Zealand Super Fund and under Kiwi Saver funds, so that all New Zealanders can own those assets again, once again, and that every drop of water that goes down the Waikato River through Mr Bennett's electorate of Hamilton, every drop of water that goes down through those Aotearoa and Karapiro and all those other dams can be returning money, like they're all like ATM machines, Mr Speaker. All those dams on the Waikato River, they're like ATM machines. Those dams in the future, through the New Zealand Super Fund, could be returning funds for the future of New Zealanders' superannuation, Mr Speaker. Further to that, this is all about ensuring that when we all retire at 65, and we will retire at 65, or some like yourself, Mr Bennett, might be a bit earlier than that, that we can provide for our seniors when they do finally give up working employment. Mr Speaker, New Zealand First, in conjunction with this bill, and we support this bill, and we think that this is a sensible thing to allow the Super Fund to be able to control its destiny and investments. New Zealand First has a brilliant scheme in terms of superannuation as part of this whole package, and that would be that you're entitled to receive at 65 and keeping it at 65 on the basis of how long you have paid into the scheme. And if you've been in this country from age 20 through to 65, you would be entitled to have 5 years curfew and away and OE and travel and living overseas for a period of time. But for the other 40 years up to age 65, if you have lived, if you have worked here, or if you've brought up a family here, or if you've been a resident here, you would receive 100% of the superannuation payout under New Zealand First policy. For every year you are out of the country over and above that, you would receive 1/40th less. So if you've only been in this country for 20 years, out of the 40 years of that eligible period, you would get 20/40ths, you'd get 1/2. But in so doing, we would allow portability of superannuation from the countries of origin. So if you're coming out of these countries of origin, you can bring your superannuation with you and then get the balance according to how much time you have spent in this country. Because, Mr Speaker, it is very clear that this country is becoming a soft touch. It's becoming a soft touch for people who see us as a place to come and live, because they can then get superannuation very easily. They can then go onto our public health system. They can then go onto our ACC system, and New Zealand is becoming seen as a soft touch around the world to come and live, because we will give out all the handouts. Well, Mr Speaker, if we're going to be serious about this, and if we're going to ensure that, and we are going from 600,000 superannuitants this year, that within the next 15 to 20 years there will be 1.1 million superannuitants. That's a huge blossoming of the post-war baby boomers over the next 15 to 20 years. If this 4.5 million people in New Zealand is going to afford to keep the superannuation scheme, to keep the payments going, we have to have it in tandem with a restructured scheme such as New Zealand First is suggesting, and we have to ensure that the governments of the day, such as National, continue to invest in the scheme, and they don't pull it out and they don't stop investing, and that the politicians do not meddle with it, that they continue to allow the super scheme to grow, because it's estimated it'll be over $100 billion within the next 20 or 30 years. Mr Speaker, New Zealand First supports this bill, but we condemn the government for what it's done to the superannuation scheme in the last 4 years.
Mr Speaker.
I'm going to call the honourable member Ian McKell.